Discuss it after we got to get to the reading. But I would look into the Black Radical traditions. If you want to understand Marxism a little bit better, you can go to Marxist. But other than that, lots of good choices to choose from here. Check out what the Panthers did, you know. All right, here we go. The Ford, page 10. Always brilliant and frequently inscrutable, Eric Williams, the first post-independence prime minister in Trinidad and Tobago, was also an Oxford-trained historian. His eyes perpetually shrouded behind dark-eyed glasses, coupled with a prominent hearing aid constantly in place in his right ear. Williams cast a forbidding appearance that belied his often playful and humorous disposition. An adherent Trinidadian nationalist, Williams displayed both deep affection and arrogance towards his fellow citizens. He intentionally brought his scholarship into the public forum, giving winding lectures in a downtown plaza at the heart of the capital city, Port of Spain. During the years in the immediate run-up to independence, 1955 to 62, his speeches contributed to the site being known popularly as the University of Woodford Square. Eric Williams was the instructor, and his audience was given full-blown lessons in Trinidadian, Caribbean, and transatlantic history, particularly with respect to the slave trade, slavery, and European colonialism. On January 15th, 1956, at Woodford Square, Eric Williams launched the People's National Movement, PNM, the political party he would lead for a quarter century. From that date onward, Woodford Square, named after a vicious, racist, earlier 19th century colonial governor, Sir Ralph James Wilford, ironically, also was the site where the architects of Trinidad's 1970s Black Power movement assembled and spoke in direct confrontation with Eric Williams. During that phase of Williams' leadership, he faced the contradictory status of being the head of a prominently black country, where black
predominantly.
I said predominantly.
No, you said prominently.
Black country, where Black Power activists surged to the national stage. The contradictions never was fully resolved. Upon his death in 1981, when he still was serving as the prime minister, there was a short-lived attempt to rename the plaza after him. Williams' protein talent spanned intellectual rigor, political acumen, and excellence in sports. He was the top student in Queen's Royal College. His high school earned him an Island scholarship to attend Oxford University in Britain. An injury occurred while playing football, soccer, that is what they call it in America, for Royal probably was the cause of deafness in his right ear. Williams reputedly was not one of the most generous teammates. He always was seeking to score by retaining possession of the ball rather than passing it to other members of his side. Nevertheless, he was so successful at scoring that he led Queen's Royal College to the island-wide championship. His personal independence on the football field marked his later inclination as leader of post-independence Trinidad and Tobago. In a June 15, 1955 speech at Woodford Square prior to the formal inauguration of the PNM, Eric Williams announced, paraphrasing Booker T. Washington, that he would, quote, "let me bucket down where I am, right here with you in the British Caribbeans." Williams was determined to stay at home and serve his native country. His discussion to return to Trinidad and Tobago and to engage unhesitantly in his political sphere may have begun with Williams' 1944 appointment to the Anglo-American Caribbean Commission. Perhaps more significantly, 1944 also was the year the University of North Carolina Press published Eric Williams' boldly revisionist and influential Capitalism Slavery. Before returning to the Caribbean, Williams had been unable to bring his 1938 Oxford University dissertation into print with 6 different British publishers, and had been unable to gain a faculty position at any of the British universities. These obstacles arose despite Williams having completed his undergraduate degree with first-class honors, despite having defended his dissertation successfully before a committee of Oxford's most celebrated imperial historians, and despite being ranked as Oxford's top PhD student in history. The Western side were American scholarly reviewers, far more enthusiastic about his dissertation as his book project, but Williams was also able to land a position as a professor of social and political science at Howard University. He held that position from 1938 through 1948, although in the later years of his appointment, he was increasingly likely to be away from the campus in the Caribbean. Howard was an institution Williams described as a black college. He used the N-word, but not the one with the O that describes black, albeit somewhat Hold on. You want to tell me that word derisively?
Derisively.
What if I check it just to make it double check so I can?
Well, I'm trying to figure out which word you were on. Were you on far more enthusiastic about his dissertation?
Howard was an institution. That paragraph.
Williams described as albeit
Howard
somewhat
was an institution. That's the paragraph I'm on.
Yeah, it's derisively. It means like bad, negative, spoke poorly of someone. But yeah, look it up.
Acting in a way that is mockingly scornful or showing a lack of respect.
Derisively.
Somewhat derisively. He complained that Howard was a place where the, quote, courses were still dominated by the articulated premise that civilization was the product of the white race of the Western world, end quote. Nevertheless, Jim Crow, America afforded a space for publication of a provocative study and the opportunity to teach at an excellent institution behind the walls of segregation. There also was a complicated route from Williams' dissertation titled, somewhat woodenly, The Economic Aspects of the Abolition of the, I'm going to use it because we're going to use it because it's a title, West Indian slave trade and slavery. That's the title of the book. To a crisp exactness of capitalism and slavery, while the economic aspects included moments of Williams' rapier touch and characteristic wit and sarcasm. We find in Capitalism Slavery, no longer bound by Oxford doctrinal requirements, the full spirit of his rhetorical style unleashed, content-wise. We also find 2 major hypotheses that are not present in the dissertations. The economic aspect was devoted to a detailed, evidence-laden case that British abolition of the slave trade in the Caribbean and eventually British emancipations of the enslaved in the Caribbean was a matter of calculated economic and strategic self-interest on the part of the British officialdom. Wherefore Williams ranged himself against the school of thought that gave primacy to a changing morality, a sweeping national humanitarian sentiment, as a cause of abolition and emancipation. In the process, he aligned himself against the positions taken by members of his own dissertation committee, most notably Reginald Copeland and Vincent Harlow. His dissertation's defense may have survived, their scrutiny when at Harlow's fierce urging, Williams acknowledged a role for a humanitarian explanation of slave emancipation. However, he consistently argued that abolition of the trade in Africans, which he treated entirely as a matter of British self-interest, produced the conditions for the humanitarian position to have greater sway with respect to emancipation. Who's in the request? Thank you, by the way, Joe, for dealing with me. We'll bring Fatima up.
No problem. I'm also I'm alt-tabbed right now. I'm trying to get the name of a book.
Okay. In addition to the abolition hypothesis that dominates Williams' dissertation, two additional hypotheses emerged in Capitalism and Slavery. One of these appear only briefly in the very first chapter, but the brevity should be diminished its importance. There, Williams argues that slavery produced racism, rather than the reverse. Therefore, for Williams, racism is an ideology that arose to provide a potent rationalization for the wholly immemorial but economically lucrative practice. Most recent scholarships, especially the work of the late Cedric Johnson, appears to challenge Williams' position in his analysis of racial capitalism. Johnson contends that racism, the practice of designating the other, is inherently inferior and deserving of subordination, predates the transatlantic slave trade and slavery in the Americas. He points out to antecedents, radicalization, and some groups of Europeans by others as part and parcel of intra-European patterns of group-based exploitation of colonialism. But this is beside the point. Williams is directing our attention to the origins of anti-black racism, not racism right large. He is asserting that there was a material foundation for the beginning of white supremacy. The third hypothesis that dominates large sections of capitalism and slavery is the argument that the slave trade in Africans and slavery in the Caribbean fueled British industrial development, and that slavery was the foundation of British capitalism. Williams argues that while the slave trade and slavery were vital to British economic development throughout most of the 18th century, once the project of the manufacturing period, quote unquote, as achieved its importance declined. When Williams later became prime minister, occasionally he was charged with being a Marxist. It was more likely a charge made in response to some policies he pursued that some might have deemed socialistic, rather than a conclusion reached by a close comparison to the text of Capitalism and Slavery and the text of Marx's Capital. Nevertheless, Marx was explicit in chapter 31 of his first volume of Capital in treating slavery in the New World, quote unquote, as a critical pillar of the rise of British industry. Marx commented that, quote, the veiled wage slavery of the wage workers in Europe needed for its pedestal slavery pure and simple in the New World, end quote. It is in full synchronym with the third hypothesis in Capitalism and Slavery. It is doubtful that Williams developed this third hypothesis from a direct reading of Marx. It is more likely if Marx's influence was present in Capitalism and Slavery at all, it came indirectly from Williams' exposure to economic history scholarships at Howard University, particularly from the economist Abram Harris. Harris prefigured Williams' analysis of the relationship between slavery and in the Americas and British industry in the following pregnant passage in Harris's 1936 publication of The Black as Capitalist. And they used the N-word. In the cultivation of the land and raw materials of the New World, indigenous and white labor was first used, but eventually that of African black people took precedence over all other and came to the looking and came to be looked upon as the source of an almost inexhaustible, cheap, and tractable labor supply. Africa supplied the Western world, not only with labor, but with much of the gold that was necessary for the staple money economy of the Western European nation. In brief, the introduction of African labor into British Caribbean islands and the profits obtained from traffic in this labor and its products, as well as the exploitation of the African continent for gold in the 15th and 16th century, were fundamental to that accumulation of capital, on the basis of which the English industrial system was raised in the 18th century. Similarly, in the United States, the profit which the slave traffic yielded in New England were an important factor in the growth of the shipping industry, and at the same time a source of surplus wealth for American industrialism. Resistance to the first and third hypothesis in the capitalism slavery was intense from scholars within the Citadel who were bent on the preservation of a glorified history of the genesis of British industry and capitalism. Subsequently to publication, Capitalism Slavery abolished thesis has come under sustained attack from historians tenaciously bound to the humanitarian school, but they never have been able to undercut the significance of Williams ascribes to the British attempt to capture Saint Domingo, modern Haiti, after the enslaved liberated themselves from France. If British officialdom generally desired to end the slave trade, why would they have sought to bring Saint Domingo within the imperial orbit?
It's Saint Domingue.
Thank you. It's Saint Domingo.
There's no O at the end. It's DOMINGUE.
Yeah, I'm doing it over and over again just to get it right. As Williams observes, Williams Pitt, and British Prime Minister, quote, could not have had Saint Domingue and abolish as well without its 40,000 slave imports. A year San Domingo might as well have been at the bottom of the sea. The conquest for San Domingue and the restoration of its vaunted slave-grown sugar industry would have necessitated extending the slave trade. When the formerly enslaved also defeated the British, the slave trade immediately lost any remaining value to the empire. Dismissal of the third hypothesis, the close connection between slavery and British industry, has been engineered in part by the invocation of what can be referred to as the, quote, small ratios, end quote, arguments. Notoriously, the economic historian Stanley Ingerman mimicked an argument his collaborator Robert Fogel made to diminish the importance of the railroads in American economic development. Ingerman calculated estimates of the ratio of profits from the slave trade to the British gross domestic product in the late 18th century and concluded that the proportion was too small to ascribe importance to that sector as fueling industrialization. Of course, any ratio of the profits from any single sector of the economy to total gross domestic product will look small in an absolute sense. Barbara Solo. It looks like Solo. Doesn't it look like Solo?
Yes.
It has a W, so it's not so low. It's just so low.
Yeah.
Demonstrating that in comparisons with similar ratios computed in the Ingerman fashion for other sectors at the time, slave trade profits presented an enormous share of British gross domestic products. More important, Ingerman's small ratio tactics does not consider the structural importance of the slave trade to the British economy in terms of its backward and forward linkages and multiplicative. I'm going to look it up. Is there multiplicative? Hello? You sure? Doesn't sound right.
Yeah, look it up. So, comment from Fura Lima. Tapping in, even though Eric was a colonized arch enemy of, I don't know what TNT radicals and revolutionaries. I don't know what a TNT.
Multiplicatively. It's multiplicatively. Which means, hold on, doing something
Yeah, but
usually.
not Lee, because remember it doesn't have the ly. It's multiplicative.
I'm getting it from the person that is pronouncing it for me right now.
Right, but you said multiplicatively. There's no ly at the end.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Sure. All right. Hold on. Meaning, related to or done by multiplication or having the power to increase a number or quantity. What was the comment now?
Okay, Fura Lima said tapping, even though Eric was a colonized arch enemy of Trinidad and Tobago radicals and revolutionaries.
Okay. Thank you for the clarification. I appreciate that. Effects on the economy's performance. The 18th century mercantilist Joshua G. and Macaulay Postelotherwat, I can't say the name, were clear about the significance of the slave trade and the slave plantation system to manufacturing in Britain. The slave trade and slavery reached backward to the shipbuilding sectors and navigation to the iron industry that produced the shackles to hold the enslaved captives in the on the ship, and to the firearms utensils, right? That's utensils. Utensils, yeah. Textiles and rum products used to exchange for human beings on the African coast. The slave trade and slavery also reached backward to the sectors of British industry that supplied the G's word, wearables, household goods, and all other necessaries for carrying out the work of the plantation. The slave trade and slavery reached forward to the production of slave-grown raw materials necessary for the production of molasses and rum, sugar, smoking materials, tobacco, dyes, indigo, and clothing, cotton. Ingerman's focus on small ratios does not capture this web of connection that produced what Marx describes as a hothouse effect, quote unquote, on the British economy. Thank you for the subtext to the opposition of Williams' analysis goes beyond mere intellectual skepticism on the part of his critics. This is ownership of the narrative of British and Americo-European economic triumphalism. Carter G. Woodson, founder of the Association of African American Life and History and one of the earliest American scholars of the African diaspora, spotted whose ox would be gored by the message of capitalism and slavery in a 1945 Journal of Black History, reviewed by Eric Williams' book. This work, quote unquote, he wrote, quote, should make a strong appeal to those who now array themselves against the British Empire because of its present policies of grabbing all the universe to which it can find any excuse for taking over. The evils of the British system are enormous and should be attacked whenever the opportunity presents itself, end quote. Woodson saw capitalism and slavery as a scholarly product that could serve as a bludgeon against British imperialism. Today, capitalism and slavery can function as a scholarly inspiration for expanding movements for reparations for the harm of slavery across the Americas. In November 2019, Gaston Brownie, the Prime Minister of Antigua and Bermuda called upon Harvard University to pay restitutions to the Commonwealth. In 1815, Harvard received a donation from Isaac Royal Jr., a slave plantation owner at Antigua, to support its first endowed professorship at Harvard Law School. Antigua appeared frequently in the pages of Capitalism and Slavery as one of the sugar islands whose production depended upon enslaved black labor. In July 2020, the rapper T.I. Joseph Harris Jr. sent a letter to Lloyd's of London, a giant British insurer. It's not insurer. That's a different insurer. What's that one?
Sure.
Yeah, but, okay. Insuring. Oh, insuring. Okay. A history of insuring slaves and slave trades, voyages of the 18th and 19th centuries. Yeah, I got it. Thank you. Lloyd's figures prominently in Williams' discussion of British enterprises that directly benefit from slave trade and slavery in Chapter 5 of Capitalism Slavery. It is not clear, however, whether T.I. learned about Lloyd's from Williams' book, nor why did he choose to single out Lloyd's in his letter with his claim for restitution. Both of these claims have some merit, but are misplaced. Slavery in Antigua was part of the British colonial system, and Capitalism and Slavery suggests that the Prime Minister claim for reparations be redirected against the British government. And why is an American rapper making a claim for restitution against a London-based insurer whose thick commercial connections to the slave trade and slavery primarily centered on the activities of British enterprises? After all, Aetna, the New York Life are among American companies that provided insurance for slave traders and slave holders in the United States. But T.I. did not direct his gaze at them. Ultimately, in this case, the U.S. government bears responsibility for the involvement of organizations under its legal purview of the slave trade and slavery. Regardless, Eric Williams' identifies many of the sinners and the sin committed in the building of British and global capitalism. The growth of British manufacturing sectors joined inextricably with slavery and the slave trade. Dissembling, right? Can or should sterilize that history of atrocities. Capitalism and slavery makes us stare down that history and compels us to seek redress from the relevant culpable parties. William A. Darity Jr., Duke University, September 19th, 2020. No wonder the T.I. thing came in. This page is intentionally left blank. All right, the preface, everybody. We're on the preface now. That was very informative. Yeah. I'm glad someone is in here knows a lot. Oh, okay. The present study is an attempt to place a historical perspective, the relationship between early capitalism and exemplified by Great Britain and the black slave trade, black slavery, and the general colonial trade of the 17th and 18th centuries. Every age rewrites history, but particularly ours, which has been forced by events to the relevance to reevaluate our conception of history and economic and political development. So this person must be a black person. So if they're talking about we, it's talking about the black community, not me. I'm not part of the we. All right. The progress of the Industrial Revolution has been treated more or less adequately in many books, both learned and popular, and its lessons are fairly well established in the consciousness of the educated class in general, and of those people in particular who are responsible for the creation and guidance of informed opinion, who are who are responsible for the creation and guidance of informed opinion. Wait, hold on, I messed up, sorry. On the other hand, while material has been accumulated and books have been written about the period which preceded the Industrial Revolution, the worldwide and interrelated nature of the commerce of that period, its direct effect upon the development of the Industrial Revolution, and the heritage which it has left upon the civilization of today, have not anywhere been placed in compact and yet comprehensive perspective. This study is an attempt to do so without, however, failing to give indications of the economic origins of well-known social, political, and even intellectual currents. The book, however, is not an essay in ideas or interpretations. It is strictly an economic study of the role of black slavery and the slave trade in providing the capital which financed the Industrial Revolution in England, and of maturing industrial capitalism in destroying the slave system. It is therefore first a study of English economic history, and second, in Caribbean and black history. It is not a study of the institution of slavery, but of the contribution of slavery to the development of British capitalism. Many debts must be acknowledged. The staffs of the following institutions were very kind in helping to and helpful to me. British Museums, Record Office. Okay, now we're getting into the I don't know if India Office Library, West India Committee, Rhodes House. Okay, these are a whole bunch of things. Hold on a second. Okay. I wish to thank. Okay, this is a whole bunch I wish to thank. What were you going to say, Joe?
Same thing.
Okay. So this might be a whole bunch of thank you things, huh? Oh, it's almost done. Oh, let me read the. Yeah, it's done. Hold on. Okay, let's go back. Let's go. Now we're on the introduction, everybody. That was short. All right, let's go on. Sorry, everybody. Tried to confuse? Yeah. All right, introduction. Sorry, everybody. Few modern historical works have enjoyed the enduring intellectual impact and appeal of Eric Williams' Capitalism and Slavery. Its publication in 1944 was greeted by acclaimed in some quarters and severe criticisms in others. The scholarly debate over its conclusions continues 50 years later, with no sign of abating. This classic work by a Caribbean scholar remains the most provocative contribution to the study of the complex relationship between African slave trade, slavery, the rise of British capitalism, and the emancipation of slave population in the Caribbean. Eric Stacey Williams was born in Trinidad in 1911. An intellectually gifted young man, he attended Queen's Royal College, one of the best secondary schools on the island. In 1931, he was awarded the Lone Island Scholarship, and in 1932 enrolled at Oxford University, where he read for a degree in modern history. At Oxford, as in Trinidad, Williams was exposed to intellectual currents that celebrated the imperial connections and gave little agency to the peoples of Africa, of African descent in the colonies. Recalling for formative years in the Trinidad, Williams noted, quote, "The intellectual equipment with which I was endowed by the Trinidad school system had two principal characteristics. Quantitatively, it was rich. Qualitatively, it was British. Be British was the slogan not only for the legislator but also of the school. As he grew intellectually, hold on a second, doing something. As he grew intellectually at Oxford, the young colonial came to question and ultimately rejected the imperial-centered analysis of his people's history. In his meetings with his tutor, R. Trevor Davies, for example, Williams reported that he consistently, quote, took an independent line, end quote, The intellectually curious student spent nearly 7 years at Oxford, receiving the PhD in December 1938. His dissertation, quote, "The economic aspects of the abolition of the Caribbean West," they used indigenous slave trade
Just say
and
Caribbean.
slavery. What's up?
So just stick with Caribbean. We know what you're talking about.
Would be it's the name of the book, the name of the dissertation. That's why would be revised, expanded, and published 5 years later. Williams accepted a teaching appointment at Howard University in 1939, where he continued to his research, elaborating on his dissertation and placing special emphasis on the relationship between slavery and the rise of British capitalism. Williams also established contact with Professor Lowell Rags, I can't say his name, of George Washington University, and Frank Pittman of Pomona College. The two scholars were leading authorities on the pre-emancipation history of British Caribbean. Acting upon the advice of Rags, Williams submitted his complete manuscript to the University of North Carolina Press on February 17, 1943. In his letter to William T. Couch, the director, the author wrote that he hoped the book, quote, "lives up to the high standards of our press as much as it would seem to fit in with the general run of works of black slavery, which the intellectual world has learned to associate with the University of North Carolina," end quote. He noted that the manuscript had been read by Pittman and Rags, and that his research has been supported by two Rosenwald Fellowship that he received in 1940 and 41 and in 1942. Williams' letters was accompanied by a one-page prospectus describing a book and its principal thesis. The book, he said, quote, "attempts to place in historical perspective the relations between early capitalism in Europe, as exemplified by Great Britain and the black slave trade and black slavery in the Caribbean. It shows how the commercial capitalism of the 18th century was built up on slavery and monopoly, while the industrial capitalism of the 19th century destroyed slavery and monopoly. He stresses that the Caribbean colonies are put in a general colonial framework, and that British Caribbean development is seen always in relations to the development of other Caribbean areas, i.e. Cuba and San Domingo, as well as other sugar processing areas, Brazil and India. Williams emphasizes that he saw the humanitarian movement not as it's customary as something abstract, but as essentially a part of the age of the general economic struggle against slavery and monopoly. Upon receipt of the manuscript, the press solicited the opinions of 4 scholars regarding its scholarly merit. Rags and Pittman were obvious choices, and the others were Professor Hugh Leffler and Charles B. Robson of the University of North Carolina. Leffler was a distinguished historian of colonial America, and Robinson was a political scientist. Rags, to whom the manuscript was dedicated, responded with a brief but strong endorsement of the work. He reported, quote, carefully read Dr. Eric Williams' manuscript, Capitalism and Slavery, both in first draft and in final form, as submitted to you, and considered it a highly meritorious piece of work. Pittman's report was longer and somewhat less enthusiastic. He indicated that he had met with Williams twice and found him, quote, a very well-trained Oxford University young man, end quote. In Pomona, scholar thought the manuscript, quote, was a sound piece of work. I suggest that in a few places he softened a somewhat caustic racial bias against capitalism, which I detected. Oh my gosh. I told him to let the facts alone constitute, in the main, the judgment against capitalist malpractices. Pittman did not consider Williams' idea original. Quote, his work his work add little to what scholars in the field know. He wrote, on the other hand, for the layman, it is a fresh, rather well-written and sound synthesis. Pittman also had other reasons for recommending the book's publication. Quote, literary work from the minority group to which Eric Williams belongs should be encouraged, especially at this time. He advised Williams he continued, very energetic and shows promise of making a name for himself. I want to help him and hope you feel the same way. The two universities of North Carolina readers also endorsed the publication of the book, but they completely misunderstood Williams' arguments and like Pittman failed to appreciate the book's refreshing originality. Loeffler found the study, quote, to be interesting, readable, and quite scholarly. He concluded, however, that the manuscript had, quote, the wrong title. In his opinion, the work was, quote, really the study of slavery in the Caribbean rather than capitalism and slavery. Loeffler thought nonetheless that Williams had made, quote, a good analysis of the influence of the Caribbean planter class in British politics. He suggested the revision of, quote, a few sentimental paragraphs in the manuscript. Robinson also found the manuscript to be, quote, a straight history of slavery in the Caribbeans, and as such, quite interesting. He found the manuscript, quote, okay, although he had only, quote, read a couple of chapters. He confessed, quote, I'd like to read the rest, but see no need to do so. Robson found no trace in the chapters I read of the kind of treatment that I thought the title might indicate. I found nothing objectionably to the tone. Robson's comment was sent to the press on May 10, 1943. Evidently influenced by the earlier recommendations of Rags and Pittman, Loeffler Williams Couch wrote to Williams on April 22nd, predicting that the, quote, work will be approved so far as editorial considerations are concerned for publications. Since the press expected that the book would have a limited market, the author was required to pay $700 subsidy to finance its publication. Couch estimated that 400 to 500 copies of the book would be sold during the first year, of a few copies annually after. Williams responded to Couch on June 9th, expressing his delight that the press planned to publish the book. He noted optimistically that he would be able to raise the subsidies, but the assistant professor found the task substantially more difficult than he had anticipated. When Couch probed him in the late summer, he admitted that his, quote, tardiness and replying to the terms of publication was due partly to, quote, in addition to our family, which introduced me to slavery of another sort, and partly illness. But there were other difficulties. Although he had, quote, negotiating in an attempt to raise the subsidy, he had been unsuccessful. Williams was confident, however, that he would be able to secure the funds, quote, in the very near future. He indicated that some of, quote, my Caribbean friends are making efforts to raise the money through the Caribbean community in the United States. But at the same time, I am trying to obtain the subsidy through the usual academic sources. Williams was eventually successful in raising the funds. On December 18, 1943, he informed Couch that some of his Caribbean friends had loaned him the money to cover the subsidies, which was to be paid in 3 installments, and he advised the director to go ahead in accordance with the terms of April 22nd letter. Williams would later struggle to repay his benefactors from the modest royalties he received. Furthermore, the efforts by the author and the press to obtain a publication subsidy from the American Council of Learned Societies, ACLS, were to no avail. After delaying the decision on the matter for 6 months, Donald Goldchild, the Secretary for Grants and Aids of the ACLS, informed Williams that his requests for funds have been rejected. Goldchild reportedly confidentially that the advisory board is in this matter did not concur with the recommendation of our committee on Black Studies. Some of our consultants felt that our manuscripts, though in high quality, was directed rather to the non-specialist in the field of history. Although Williams acceded to the request to subsidize the publication of the book, he was not immediately very responsive to the suggestion that the title should be changed. After promising to address the matter more fully at the later date, the author informed Couch on September 4th, 1943 that, quote, with the respect to the change of the title suggested by our readers, I am wholly in disagreement with your suggestion. William had sought the advice of Professor McAville, Herksgovitz, and the distinguished anthropologist and sensitive student of African in diaspora. He hoped that Herksgovitz would be sympathetic to the title that he had proposed. Although Herksgovitz found the manuscript, quote, an interesting piece of work with a thesis that I regard as important to present, he did not endorse its title. According to Williams, Herksgovitz, quote, was inclined to agree with the reader. When I told him of it, that the title ought to be changed, I disagreed, displaying the pugnacity. I'm gonna look at that word. Do you know what it is, Joe?
It's pugnacity, but I don't know what it means.
Pugnacity, yeah. Hey, it's Coco. Pugnacity. A strong natural desire to fight, argue, or be aggressive. That characterizes him as a scholar and a politician. Williams outlined his objection vigorously to those who suggested that the book was about slavery in the Caribbean. He responded, quote, that is not the book I set out to write, and the book has nothing of the treatment or conditions of the slaves. It deals with what the slaves produced, how they were purchased, and the consequences of these points for capitalism. Williams did not, however, adverse to a compromise, provided that the new title reflected the principal argument and content of the work. Herksgovitz had proposed two titles, which Williams noted in December 18th letter to Couch. The first is Slavery in the Industrial Revolution. To my mind, this is inadequate, as it excludes the role of slavery in the period of commercial capitalism, to which I devote my pages. The second is Slavery in the Development of Capitalism. That satisfies me, but it seems too long. I have not yet been convinced by anyone that I am not justified in speaking in general terms of capitalism when the book deals with British capitalism, which was the model of parent of capitalism. Elsewhere, it is important to note, too, that two scholars like Professor Rags and Professor Pittman entirely approve of my choice. I do not wish to labor the point, but my choice expresses the book I intended to write and have written. If you insist on changing it, when Professor Herksgovitz, Slavery in the Development of Capitalism, I'm prepared to accept as a compromise, but slavery in the Caribbean is out of the question. The press probably saw little point in the contesting of the author's forceful arguments and decided to retain the original title. As editorial works began on the manuscripts of 1944, I almost said 1844, Williams took an active interest in its progress, suggesting changes from time to time. In fact, Chapter 12 was added in June when the manuscript was already in page proofs. Williams informed his editor, May Littlejohn, on June 3rd that he was adding a new chapter entitled Slaves and Emancipation. He noted that he had found some wonderful information on the role of slaves in furthering the cause of emancipation, explaining, I have discussed the attitude of the government, the absentee planters, the capitalists, and the humanitarians. Now I discuss the slaves. I have discussed the battle in England. Now I discuss the battle in the Caribbeans. And as the book begins with the origins of black slavery, it would be effective to end it with the slaves' attempt to end slavery. The general theme is that the pressure from the capitalists and humanitarians at home on the planters was aggravated in the colonies by pressure from the slaves, and that by 1833, if slavery was not abolished from above, it would have been abolished from below. When Williams submitted the complete chapters on June 19th, he elaborated on his reasons for writing it. Quote, as I read over the manuscripts, he confessed, it struck me that I had dealt with all aspects of the problem for over 2 centuries, but the people who are the objects and bases of the movement for emancipation I had left untouched. Therefore, laid myself open to the devastating criticisms that my history was old style because my eyes were glued entirely upon those above. Chapter 12 makes this criticism possible. The book is finally published in November 11th, 1944. The press had originally intended to print 1,000 copies, but because of the author's insistence that there would be a substantial market for the work, and probably as a result of its own market survey, the number was increased to 1,500. The Caribbean author was particularly sensitive on the question of how he would be described in the press marketing materials. When he submitted the biographical sketch that the press requested, he wrote that he hoped he would be characterized as a Caribbean rather than a Trinidadian. In the advertisements, he explained to Couch, I have put down that I was born in Trinidad, but I should appreciate it if somewhere you can arrange to describe me as a Caribbean born in Trinidad rather than as a Trinidadian. It might seem a trifle, but we Caribbeans set much store by it. This assertion of a Caribbean identity in contradistinction to a more narrowly constructed Trinidadian one remained an important feature in Williams' life and work. Williams also sought to ensure that the book would derive its intellectual respectability from the strength of its arguments and not from the personality of its author or his academic qualifications. After he saw the first proofs of the book, he hastened to assure his editor that he was, quote, so happy to see the galleys with a simple statement by Eric Williams. I have such a horror of all these high-sounding titles and lengthy decrees. Still, Williams was extraordinarily active in promoting the sale of the book in the United States, the Caribbean, and Canada. On April 25th, 1944, nearly 7 months before the book appeared, Williams wrote to Couch that he had just returned from a tour of the west of the Caribbean, where I found, as I had expected, a tremendous interest in the history of the west end of the Caribbean. I was asked to speak to a subscribers of the public library of Trinidad, and chose for my topic, quote, the British West Caribbean in world history, giving the audience, so to speak, a preview of the book. The governor was in the chair, so it was a gala occasion. The hall meant for 300 had accommodated 700. In all sides, I have been told that there never has been anything comparable in Trinidad history. I am not so modest as to deny that some part of the interest was due to the speaker, but at the same time, the subject exercised a great attention. I was told afterwards that my book would sell 1,000 copies in Trinidad. And whilst the figure appears to be a little high, the exaggeration is not as great as it might appear to the outsider. I had been given some public publicity in Barbados and British Guiana, and I found there, too, a great interest in the book. Williams was able to persuade the press to sell the book in the West, in the Caribbean, for $1 instead of $3 that it cost in the United States. He also purchased several copies at a discount rate for authors and sold them in the United States and Canada, particularly to Caribbean students. 4 months after the book's publication, he stressed to Couch that he was, quote, very keen on Caribbeans in particular reading the book, believing that they would profit intellectually and in other ways from it. I have taken a public line in the book. Williams reminded Couch, which Caribbeans more than anyone else needed to understand. Williams was so successful in selling the book that Port Cowless, the executive assistant to the director of the press, complimented him for his role. Most authors who buy a number of copies in their own works seem to do it for themselves, wrote Krauls. You are the exception in that you persuade other people to buy them, she added. The remarkable success of the book led to the press to order a second printing of 1,500 copies in the summer of 1945. Williams was very pleased, writing to Couch on August 18th, 1945. He exalted? That's not exalted, is it? That's not exalted.
Yes, exalted.
I am, of course, very happy that the book is going so well. Without wishing to appear conceited, however, I am not surprised. Not only slavery, but also the Caribbeans are subjects of great interest in the United States and England, and of course, the Caribbeans today. By December 31st, 1949, the press had sold 2,412 copies of the book and had distributed 95 complimentary book copies. The royalties amounted to $271.80, a sum that fell far short of the author's obligation to his benefactors. Capitalism and Slavery was widely reviewed. Scholarly journals, literary magazines, and the popular press took notes of its appearance. The reviews were understandably mixed. Reviewers of African descent uniformly praised the work, while those who claimed a European heritage were much less enthusiastic and more divided in their reception. Writing in the Black College Quarterly, noted black scholar Lorenzo Grini called the book a scholarly study. He committed that, quote, a work of this kind has been long overdue, and Dr. Williams has filled the need in brilliant fashion. The reviewer for the crisis historian J.R. Rogers complimented the author for showing better, quote, better than I can recall have ever seen that the New World owes to black people, the victims of slavery and the slave trade, for its developments, particularly in its pioneer stage, and as well as England, for its rise from a small power to the world's greatest empire. Carter G. Woodson, a journal of black history, praised the book for marking the beginning of the scientific study of slavery from the international point of view. Among the white reviewers, Elizabeth Donen was, quote, sometimes troubled by the feeling that the thesis, plausible as it is, may be too simple. The rigidity of the economic interpretation makes small allowances for the complexity of man's motives and for the play of circumstances which often create utterly unplanned and unexpected situations. She asserted in a short hostile review. Frank Thunenbaum found that the book was tainted. What? Quote, with a strongly flavored faith in the economic interpretation of history, giving students enthusiasm by invisible notions of black nationalism. End quote. The reviewer for the Times literary supplement, D.W. Brogan, charged that some of the sections in this book are more brilliant guesses than complete demonstrations of uncontestable claims of cause and effect. Of course, the white people have to be, ugh! Nevertheless, Borgen continued, this is an admirably written, argued, and original piece of work. Henry Steele Commerger found the work one of the most learned, most penetrating, and most significant that has appeared in this field of history. It is hardly surprising that the few English historians sought to dismiss Williams' argument with venomous assaults, rather than reasoned arguments, careful research and analysis. D.A. Fernini, an economic historian, suggested that the book had presented the author's own community with a sustaining myth that capitalism was responsible for their conditions, a view that has not found favor in Western Europe, where history has been separated from its taproot and myth, but has been found highly acceptable to the educated elites in Africa and Asia. Much less critical, but blatantly patronizing, was J.D. Fig, the Africanist, who felt that Williams' assault on the humanitarian arguments for the abolition of slavery was inevitably in the late 1930s and early 1940s, when a young black radical from the colonies, still more one from a bitterly depressed Caribbean, found himself working in the shadows of the school of imperial history that Sir Reginald Copeland had established within the calm walls of Oxford University. The first extended scholarly critique of slavery and capitalism did not appear until 1968. Writing the Economic History Review, English historians Roger Anstey challenged the argument that a mature capitalism destroyed slavery. Other scholars benefiting from decades of research since the publication of the book in 1944 soon attempted to undermine its principal conclusion. As one measures of the debates that the book continues to generate, some of the world's leading students of the economic slavery gathered in Bellingo, Italy in 1984 to discuss the ideas that Eric Williams advanced in his classic works. Real quick, remember 28, just real quick, I want to see. Oh, we're okay, never mind. 28.
Yeah, we're almost done. And as soon as we get done, I want to say something.
Capitalism and Slavery appeared when the author was only 33 years old, a fact that is sometimes overlooked. Despite his youth, it is a work of conceptual brilliance, intellectually matured, bold, incisive, and immensely provocative. Some contemporary scholars had chipped away at the edges of the book's arguments, and others have attacked its core. But the central contentions have not been vanquished intellectually. In fact, Williams' conceptualization of the problematic remains, even if some later scholars have refined his questions and offered other answers. The publication of Capitalism and Slavery marked an important watershed of historiography of the Caribbean. It inaugurated a new phase in the study of the relationship between colonial powers and the colonies, permanently altering the terms of the analysis and the subsequent discourse. But its ramification extended beyond the Caribbean. Williams established a centrality of African slavery and the slave trade to the English economy, challenging the traditional views that the colonies were more the recipients of metropolitan benevolence and less the principal agent in the construction of the imperial powers' propensity. His conclusions may be rejected, but no serious scholar can avoid confronting the important question the book poses. Capitalism and slavery will remain historically treasured. Colin A. Palmer. What's up? What do you want to say?
So, I agree with his conclusions may be rejected, because I believe that, the picture got moved on the screen. I believe that black people freed themselves from slavery. I don't believe capitalism.
So does Eric Williams. So does Eric Williams.
Okay.
He believes that too.
Okay.
It says that. In fact, people deny him of that thing. He even says that his perspective is they self-emancipated. Are you there?
Yeah, I just haven't seen that yet.
It was in that what I was reading.
But what we were reading just kept saying repeatedly that capitalism ended slavery.
No, that was what those other scholars were saying about his book. They disagree with the fact that he thinks that slaves were self-emancipation. Are you okay?
We'll see. Yeah, I just say we'll see.
What do you mean? That's exactly what he said. That's what Eric Williams' position is. You were reading the reviews from other scholars, not him. Are you there?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right, we got 20 minutes. Let me see here. Is there any stopping points in this book? All right, there's no stopping points. Do we stop here and start tomorrow? Or what do we do? What do you think? There's no stopping points.
I'm eating and following along, so it's up to you.
I asked you.
How's your throat feel?
I'm asking you. You're part of this.
Stop and here looks good. I'll go with the comments. Stop
Okay.
and here looks good.
All right, we'll start chapter 1 tomorrow. That sounds good. I usually continue another 20 minutes, but it seems like a good stopping point, so there's not a lot of stopping points inside the chapter. So we're going to add this bookmark. We stopped on page 32, according to the PDF. Yeah, no problem. We're going to read more about this. We're going to figure this out.
Yep. Anybody want to come up and discuss what we just read in the thing, or?
Yeah, it's only let's wait till you get into the chapters.
Okay.
Yeah, let's wait till we get into the chapters. All right. All right. Well, thank you everybody for sticking around. We'll continue to chapter 1 tomorrow. Thank you for bearing with me through all those introductions and prefaces. Appreciate that.